In this story, I'm going to tell you how my mother-in-law tried to steal our house, quietly, legally, and with a smile. I let her think she was winning, but I didn't panic. I learned property law at night, tracked intercepted mail, and gathered the one piece of proof she couldn't explain away. Then, at her own 75th birthday dinner, I made the family read the truth aloud. What she thought was invisible blew up in front of everyone. She stood at the doorway smiling like a queen while my entire life was being quietly rewritten. I knew immediately something was wrong when my mother-in-law calmly said, "You wouldn't understand how family works here," as if I was greedy instead of the one locked out. If she thought I was helpless and naive, she was about to learn how dangerous that mistake would be, and everyone in that room would watch it unfold. Let me take you back to the summer before our daughter was born. I am Evelyn Hart, 34, from Portland, Oregon. For the first 2 years of our marriage, I thought she was simply difficult but harmless. She brought casseroles when we were sick, praised my parenting in front of others, and kissed my forehead at holidays. I believed I had earned a place in the family by effort and patience. But she had a way of seasoning kindness with a barb, a pat on the head that left a bruise. At first, the bruises were tiny and easy to ignore. Then, at a small birthday dinner for my husband, she corrected me about how I folded napkins while smiling and said, "We don't do things like that in this family." As if my childhood traditions mattered less than some invisible rulebook she kept. I froze. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might faint. I remember the light catching the rim of my wineglass and the way a song on the restaurant stereo blurred into static. Her hand brushed my husband's sleeve and she said, "If you want to keep the house, you'll do as I say," like it was gentle advice instead of a threat. I swallowed and smiled because what else did I have to do? But inside, the thought of the title deed we'd signed when we bought our bungalow, my name right there on the paper, felt like the only rope I had. That thought was a match in a dry room. I didn't respond then. I made tea for everyone afterward and pretended nothing had happened. But that night, curled on the kitchen floor while our dog snored under my knees, I felt the first real stomach-sinking fear of losing our home. That was the moment I decided I would not be the victim in my own life. The next morning, while my husband took a shower, I opened his laptop and found an email from his mother titled "Quick Housekeeping." One sentence stood out like an accusation: "We should consider changing the deed while your wife is still new to the family." Scrolling through, I found a calendar invite labeled "Estate Conversation Urgent." My hands shook. Attached to the email was an invoice from a document service, the same one I had seen in late-night searches on consumer forums when I'd first wondered about odd deeds and quitclaims. My pulse thrummed in my ears. I knew then that whatever I was feeling wasn't paranoia, someone was making plans without us. People will tell you to confront, to carry everything into the light the moment you suspect betrayal. I kept that email to myself. I wanted proof before I accused his mother of anything. Caution, I told myself, not cowardice. Still, I felt ridiculous, like a soldier assembling strategy in the laundry room while the battle raged in plain sight. Over the following months, her behavior became a grammar of control, small, precise, and chillingly consistent. At my sister-in-law's baby shower, she praised how quiet and unassuming I was and then added, "Which is what keeps people like us safe from trouble," and everyone laughed except me. I felt the room tilt. A birthday card arrived for me with an underline beneath the phrase, "You try hard." Once she rearranged my recipe box and said, "You should ask me before you keep family things in that shed." As if the shed, my sanctuary of jars and handwritten recipes, could be claimed by someone feeling entitled. The escalation wasn't sudden, it was surgical. She called the mortgage company and asked whether the loan could be put into a family trust, making the conversation sound routine. When I asked my husband, he waved me off with a comfort that felt thin. "She insists it's for tax reasons," he said defensively. A month later, I found a notarized power of attorney in the mail naming his sister as his father's representative. The signature looked familiar, but the date, the week after he'd been in the hospital for a minor procedure, made my stomach drop. I remember the clock over our stove chiming 4:12 p.m. the exact second the thought landed. Someone had tampered with time and signatures. It would have been satisfying to confront her that night with heat and accusation. There's a kind of raw honesty and rage. But I understood then the power of documents. They make decisions feel inevitable, lawful, permanent. I chose to collect the truth. My approach was small-minded, meticulous, and dull. I installed a door camera because the idea of an extra set of eyes was comfort when you felt invisible. I kept copies of every mortgage statement, every email, every envelope that arrived. I began quiet conversations at night with a legal clinic. The attorney in turn took me seriously in a way that friends didn't. The power of attorney's dates and the notary's name matched an online complaint about forged documents. An unlikely ally emerged. The neighbor who mowed his lawn with the kind of meticulousness my mother-in-law admired knocked and handed me a stack of envelopes he'd been saving after he noticed odd postmarks. He had spoilt me without meaning to, a slip of civility that was actually the starting point for evidence. My sister-in-law, who had been polite but distant, confessed one afternoon that she'd been quietly pressured to sign certain papers when she'd visited last spring and had assumed, as people often do, that it was routine. Her apology was small and shaky. "I didn't want to make a scene." We agreed in that breathy, conspiratorial way people do when working in a home kitchen with flour on their hands to collect undeniable proof instead of starting a fight. There were days when my stomach roiled with guilt. Maybe I was too strategic. Maybe I should have told my husband then and let us bulldoze through her with righteous fury. But I kept thinking of being a mother with a child in the world who needed a home. Evidence, I convinced myself, not spectacle. My plan felt in moments of weakness like cowardice dressed in forethought. The opportunity presented itself at my mother-in-law's 75th birthday dinner. She'd chosen the restaurant, orchestrated the seating, and cast herself as the matriarch arranging the ritual. I arrived with a folder heavy with copies, the power of attorney with the questionable date, the invoice pointing to the document service, the quitclaim deed she tried to slip under us, and a bank statement showing an unexplained transfer to an account bearing her name. I asked the eldest cousin to read aloud the letter I had sent to the family ahead of time. She obligingly began in a clear voice while I watched the expressions shift like weather. At first, my mother-in-law wore the same serene smile she always did, confident of applause. Then she shifted into damage control. "There's been a mistake," she said, and the word mistake was soft armor. "Those papers cannot be right, someone must have forged them." I felt a hot, righteous fury spark. How dare she turn the tables and accuse anyone of forgery when she'd been cataloging ways to take what belonged to our family? I handed the cousin the original envelope with its postmarks and pointed to a verified signature sample we'd had professionally compared. Under magnification, my father-in-law's stroke patterns did not match the script on the contested power of attorney. Silence pressed. My husband's face slid from confusion into a pale, horror-struck look I will never forget. The notary, a calm woman who had been at the restaurant and recognized the names, compared dates and called the county. A distant aunt I hadn't seen in years shuffled forward and said she'd seen my mother-in-law at the county office the week before my father-in-law left the care home, asking pointed questions about deeds. It was like watching an old building reveal a hidden room. The structure you thought solid quietly gave way. When my mother-in-law finally spoke, she said something intended to elevate her actions. "I did what I had to do to protect our family's legacy." The phrase landed like an indictment. My sister-in-law produced screenshots of text messages, casual, cheerful, in which our mother-in-law had described the meetings she'd set up with the document service as practical and necessary. My husband, finally finding his voice, looked at her and said simply, "Did you sign his name?" The small courtroom of the restaurant held its breath. The notary confirmed that the county had placed a temporary hold on the title transfer pending investigation. The bank reversed the transfer the next week. The slow unspooling I had feared ended with a hush of papers and a bureaucratic stamp. There was no cinematic showdown, no shouting in the street, only the steady, almost mechanical work of people inspecting ink and postmarks and dates. In the days that followed, gossip moved faster than the legal system. Some relatives closed ranks, some embarrassingly issued half-hearted apologies for not seeing the signs. Invitations dwindled for her. Friends who had once admired her prudence now avoided her calls. She called my husband and I 2 weeks later with a voice that attempted contrition. "I'm sorry for pushing too hard," she said, and then, as if to reclaim some dignity, "but I was only trying to keep the house in the right hands." She had tried to wrap her ambition in the language of preservation. Perhaps that's what made it so insidious. People will say I was cruel to keep her at arm's length after that. That forgiveness would have been nobler. Others will argue I should have pushed for criminal charges and dragged the mess into open court. I chose a middle path: maintain distance, enforce boundaries, and make sure no one could ever rewrite our lives the way she had tried to. Home is full of small certainties, and after the trial of paper and patience, it felt important to reclaim them. One morning, the house quiet and sunlit, I opened a box of recipe cards we'd inherited from my grandmother. The cards, smudged and dog-eared, smelled faintly of cloves and lemon oil. My son came into the kitchen with a cereal bowl clutched to his chest and asked, "Mama, are we okay now?" I hugged him, felt his small body press into mine, and let myself believe it was true. I forgave my husband for the delay in understanding because he'd been raised to trust a mother that way. He had not been cruel, only conditioned. We put rules in place, all estate conversations to include both of us, and a lawyer present. The last time I saw my mother-in-law, she stood across the street at a neighbor's yard sale and looked at me with the stare of someone reduced from queen to spectator. I waved. I could have relished her discomfort or called her out publicly for the humiliation she deserved. Instead, I chose a quieter power, the power of indifference. I was not interested in owning her shame. I was interested in keeping my child safe and teaching him to stand for himself. Looking back, I learned something small and terrible: that love does not mean allowing another person to rewrite your life in silence. It means documenting moments, keeping receipts, and having the courage to make your case when charm becomes a weapon. It means forgiving the people who failed you when forgiveness is necessary for your own peace, not because they earned it, but because you need to move forward. The house still creaks in the winter, the same as it always did, but now when I hang a decoration, I feel the right to say it belongs. The quiet victory tastes like ordinary things: clean sheets, a coffee steaming on the table, a child's scissors left on the counter. Those small, stubborn certainties are mine to protect.